think we're good. Okay. Thanks. Cool. So hi everybody, I'm Noam. I'm really excited to be here. It's my first time in Vienna, and I'm very happy that you guys were so accepting in getting me here. I'm going to talk today about writing full stack code without repeating yourself. But before I start, let me start just with some general questions. Most of you are front-end developers? Yeah, I'm going to guess, okay. Which frameworks are you using? React, show of hands? Okay. Angular? Okay. Cool. Vue? Okay. Svelte, anyone? Cool. Okay. I don't have a tutorial for Svelte. You're welcome to contribute it. I'll talk to you afterwards. How many of you are full stack developers? Perfect. What's your backend Node.js? Okay, less. Please be more. TypeScript on the backend? Okay, cool. Perfect. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about writing full stack applications without repeating yourself. But first, a little bit of introduction. I'm Noam. I founded Firefly almost 17 years ago, a company that works a lot with enterprises, enterprise applications, CRMs, ERPs, banking, insurance, huge application. I've got a lot of experience in that business, and it set me up to what we're going to talk about today. Did a lot of C#, do a lot of TypeScript these days, open source projects, written some apps for NGOs, which I'll talk about a little bit later. This is my desktop, a 55-inch 4K screen. I strongly recommend it. Like, how many of you use more than one screen? Okay, how many of you like the black barrier between whatever you're trying to do? Okay, so that was my motivation. And at some point, like 2015, I started working like this, and I'm not looking back. That's my lovely family. And that's the logo of the small town I come from. So as I said, I've dealt with a lot of enterprise applications, huge applications, hundreds of tables, thousands of forms, and always saw front-end code and back-end code, and front-end code and back-end code, and everything was written twice, and everything you had to search for, in the form, in the API, in the controller, in the service, all over the code. I've seen a lot of boilerplate code being repeated again and again and again, like routes. We have the put, post, delete, several get routes, per each entity, multiplied by hundreds of entities, with the bugs, with the security vulnerabilities. Hell, okay, I hated those. The way I look at it, we have an entity, a logical entity that represents something, like a product, and then we have a lot of meta code around it. We have the data access code, which can be SQLs or some kind of ORM, and we have all the routes around it, and we have front-end code that gets the JSON and creates objects they use on the front end. And as far as I'm concerned, all of those should be derived from that. I don't have to write that code. It doesn't make sense to write that code. Now, as soon as Node.js came out, I was really excited because now I can write the same language on the front end and the back end, but I saw that not enough people are doing that. And I started to set my goals. I said I want to share everything between the front end and the back end. And I'm a lazy developer. I like TypeScript. I hate errors. And so I wanted to share typing first and foremost. And validation. It's something that we also duplicate. We have API level validation. We have front end validation. Why not have it the same code? And authorization and authentication. Again, who is authorized to do which operations on the API and who sees the delete button on the screen. Okay, all of those are duplicate rules that are spread across my code, and I want to solve that. I don't like vendor locking. Okay, so I'm not looking to be a backend as a service such as Firebase or any one of those. Did anyone play with those? Okay, cool. So they're amazing and they do great things, but at some point you're stuck with them and you cannot move on. And that's something that I didn't want to do. I hate code generation because someone needs to maintain it. I hate boilerplate code because someone needs to maintain it. And I don't like config files because I believe that code is the best way to express our logic. You can refactor code, you have great tooling around code. So JSON files or YAML files or all of those are just one more thing you need to maintain and understand. So I started with these ideas a few years ago, and I had some time on my hand. So I wrote an app for a small NGO, a food bank, that distribute foods to poor people. Like there's a warehouse, you come in, they tell, here are your 5 families, go give them food. So we've written an app for that. And I started with 50 parcels, 150 parcels. By the end of 2019, we distributed 17,000 parcels in Israel with several NGOs. And then COVID came. And in COVID in Israel, I don't know how it was over here, but in Israel, there were severe lockdowns where people couldn't go buy groceries. Okay, people over the age of 65 were not allowed to leave their house and go buy groceries. So the government and the army took it upon themselves to distribute food to these people at their homes. And I had a software that can do that. So I had the privilege of being part of that effort. And I scaled from 17,000 parcels a year to 17,000 parcels a day. And using these principles, okay, the non-duplicate code, the reuse of code between the front end of the back end, allowed me to be agile and to respond quickly to such changes in scale. Also, having the Israeli army use this has the benefit of having some pretty cool cyber tests done on it and making sure that it keeps the privacy of the people that needs to be kept private. We won the presidential award for that, and we're still doing that today. We're distributing 450,000 parcels every year on a Heroku server that cost me $7 for the servers and $9 for the database. Okay, so yeah, it was an exercise in how cheap can I be. And so I'm pretty proud of that. So we thought it was time to share the love. So we started writing docs and wrote some tutorials and wrote some documentation and put a small little one-liner in Hacker News back in May 2022. Here we had about 40 stars. Now we have about 1,700 stars. And if you like what I say today at the end of the presentation, I will politely ask you guys to also add some stars to our mix. I think that the main thing about Remount is that it plays nice with others. The entire idea is that it's a tool that is there to help you, but not to constrain you. Okay, you can use it where it provides you with value and use everything else you use today in places where it doesn't provide you value. So it can work with any front-end framework, React, Angular, Vue, Svelte, Quick, vanilla JavaScript, any backend, any database, any cloud provider. You can add it to an existing project or you can write new projects. Just there to help, just an NPM package that you can use. So what do I have planned for you today? This is a live coding session. So I hope that the code gods are going to be with me. And we're going to take a front end to-do app written in React and turn it into a full stack app. We're going to do server-side paging, sorting, and filtering, demonstrate all cloud capabilities, validation, server-side application. We're going to use a Postgres database. How many of you use Postgres? Cool. I love the database. And we do authentication, authorizations, and if you're patient enough and nobody drags me like off the stage, we might even get to deployment. Sounds reasonable for 25 minutes? Okay, so let's have a go. So I'm going to close this, and okay. So here I have a React app. I'm using Vite. How many use Vite? Cool. Okay, so I'm using Vite. I love Vite. It's amazing. And I have a basic React app. Let's review its code. And the fonts are huge, so it's going to be interesting. So the first thing we have is a task. Okay. And that task has an ID, a title, and a completed that represents the title and the completed. And then we have our app.tsx component, which has an array of tasks, which are the tasks that we see over here. A new task functionality that happens when we say new task over here. Okay, we get the task. And set all completed, add task, set completed, set title, delete task, and the HTML for that. Reasonable React app? Okay. Okay, feel free. By the way, I'm an Israeli. Ask questions away. We're not known for our civility. So feel free to just shoot. Anyhow, the problem with this app is that it doesn't have any state. It refreshes and everything is in the browser. So I want to take this front-end app and in the next 25 minutes, make it into a full stack app. So the first thing we need to do for a full stack app is to have a server. So I'm going to add a backend index.ts. And here I'm going to minimize everything that I don't want to see. I'm going to say const app equals express. Okay, makes sense. Normal server, we have a good start. Now I'm going to do something that is a nice little trick. I love hot reloading. I love Vite. I want to get Vite to hot reload my server for me. Okay, so I don't want to have two terminals because two terminals is ugly. So I'm going to export it, and I'm going to go to Vite config, and I'm going to say import express from Vite 3 plugin express, and tell it express source backend. Okay, so now Vite runs my backend, and to make sure, console log aha, and I get the aha over here. Okay, so Vite runs my server. So we have a nice Express server, and later we want to obviously run it somewhere with listening while listening to port. So I'm going to say over here if process.env. Yes, I need to disable these tooltips. Process.env Vite, or actually if not Vite, then app listen 3002. Okay? Actually means if I'm not running within Vite, listen to the port, otherwise Vite is responsible for listening to the port. Cool? That was the most sophisticated thing so far. Also, next thing I want to do, I want to add remult into the mix. So I'm going to say import remult express. Okay, the font is challenging. Remult express. Anyone feels that the font is too big, now it's a good time to say. And then I'm going to say app use remult express. Okay? That's it. That's the setup I need to get remult configured here. So far, so good? Cool. Now, in our app, we have our nice little task, which I think should be the focal point of anything. I want to, first of all, reuse it between the front end and the back end. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to create a folder called shared. And I'll drag and drop my task from the front end to the shared folder. And let VS Code ponder on it. And now that it's all here and saved, I want to use this task as the basis for everything. Okay, I want to derive the database from it, the APIs, the front-end query language. I want everything to be here. I want this to be the single source of truth of anything important that is related to task. So the first thing I'll do is decorate it with the entity decorator and give it a key. And then I'm going to ask it to allow all the CRUD capabilities. Okay? Later I'll restrict it with authorization and authentication, but let's start with full CRUD. And then I'm going to give each field their specific roles. So I'm going to have auto increment, string, and Boolean. So each field has its own type. And last, I'm going to go to the backend and say that I list it in my entities array. Now, as soon as I do that, Vite has restarted, and now I have a new route, API/tasks. Okay, so let's go ahead and play with that route. I'm going to open a new request. I'm going to hit get, and I'm going to get an empty array because we don't have data in our database. Okay, let's post. So I'm going to say title and hello and post, and now I have the data. Okay, and if I go to get again, I'll get the data. Cool? So what are we doing for a database? We've just set up pretty much nothing. So when you start developing, we start with a very basic JSON database. It just stores the data in a JSON file, and later we'll use a proper database such as Postgres or or other cool databases that they obviously supported. Cool. So let's take it from here. I'm going to go and hijack some tasks from the front end because I don't like typing. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to cut it and save. So now we have no state in the front end. And I'm going to go to this nice little utility and say post and say array and send. And it posted everything. And now we have data in our database. Okay. So just by defining this task and registering it in the entities array, I got database functionality and I got an API that works. Now let's go ahead and use it in the front end. So I'm going to go to our app TSX. I'm going to find a task repo. It's of type remult repo task. Okay. When I do that, I actually ask remult to give me a repository of type task. And that repository, I'm going to use that repository to get data from the backend, to update data to the backend, to do anything that is related to task. Note that I'm reusing the same task type that I was using on the server. Okay, so the same type is reused. And then all that's left to do is add a here, use effect, and say task repo find, then set tasks. And I get the tasks. Okay. Thank you. So yeah, it just went and get the tasks from the database. Now I'm not using any weird protocols. I'm a big fan of standards. So this is just a REST API call to the backend that goes and get the data. Okay, but end-to-end typing, front-end to backend, using the same types, the same definition to define the database, the APIs, and the front-end query language. Okay, it also handles the concepts, the complicated concepts of objects such as date. You know, I find it unreasonable that when I need to pass a date from the backend to the front end, it's complicated. Okay, so it handles those and every other object. It does quite a lot of heavy lifting. You don't need to worry about all of those transition layers. Now, find is nice, but I rarely want to get all the data. So what we've done is we've looked at the common use cases that people do when they get data from the backend and said, hey, let's just incorporate them in. So I think the first thing people like to do is paging. So when I say limit 2, I will only get the first 2 rows. Or limit 4, I'll get the first 4. Or page 2. Okay. Think about all the times we re-implemented paging. Why don't we just write it once and use it? We can do server-side sorting and say completed ascending, and it will sort it so the completed will be last. Or descending, so it will be on top. I can do server-side filtering. So only get the completed tasks or the uncompleted tasks, or undefined to get all the tasks. And note that all of these are just REST API calls. Okay? Easy standard REST API calls that you can use anywhere. Hit me.
Are you getting
Type safety?
Safety?
Yes. Yes. So if I try to say completed true, okay, I will get it type error. Cool. Thank you for that. That's an excellent question. Great. So we've got a query language and it's working, and it can be fairly complex. I'm showing the basics here, but it can be fairly complex. And the next thing I want to do is start supporting the CRUD functionality. So first of all, I want to be able to add the tasks. So I'm going to go to the add task method and say await task repo insert. And so now if I say a new task and add, it will make a post API call that you can see over here. And it added the task to our database. Okay. And again, 100% typed. I can go and implement delete. So you can say await task repo delete task. So now if I delete something, it will make a delete API call and delete it from my database. Surprise, right? And if I want to save the check completed, I can go to the set completed and say await task repo save. Okay. So whenever I check a checkbox, it will make a put request to my backend and send the check to the backend. And this is where the JSON database is kind of fun because it updates in real time. So it makes it easy to figure out what's going on in the app without writing multiple queries. Okay? Yeah, go ahead.
You set the ID to auto increment with the decorator, but you didn't specify ID. So how does it know which one is the unique ID?
In my task, by setting this to auto increment and by naming it ID, it knows that it's the ID. I can have other types. You have on the entity decorator the ability to specify which column or columns represent the ID. But by default, ID is a good name, so I use it. Okay. So we've done that. And the next thing I want to do is allow to edit some text values. So I'm going to say, or actually save the changes. So I'm going to just add over here static async save, sorry, wow, blackout, const save task, try, catch, and remember that I'm doing an alert over here. So I'm saying alert error.message. Remember that because someone later is going to ask me if there's another way to show errors other than alert. So I wrote the alert in the external code. And here I'm going to do set task with a await task repo save of task. Okay, so this will save a change, and I will call it on blur of my input. Okay, so now as soon as I make an edit and leave the text box, I will get a put request to the backend, and the data will update on the backend. Okay, so quick recap. Just by defining the task here, okay, with these decorators, registering it on the backend, I have full stack capabilities and full stack typing. I have data definitions, APIs, front-end type query language, full CAD capabilities with these simple definitions. Yeah, hit me.
After you do a change on the database, is it loading the state again?
The put request, when it's sent to the database, it makes an update to the database, returns the data updated and up to date to the front end. So if you have a trigger that updates the data, you'll get the value after the trigger. Okay. Love the questions. So setup, entities, paging, CAD, we've completed. Now everything that you've seen so far has been working for years, and we love it and we're proud of it, and it's running wild. But what I'm going to show you next was actually released on Sunday, and the release notes were released just today. I specifically released it for this meetup. So here is the use case. My user loved my application so much that he gave it to another user. And the other user in the application came in and started doing things, completing tasks, and the first user didn't see it. Okay. The first user had to do the horrendous act of clicking refresh, which is way more than we can ever expect the user to do. So we all obviously understand the complexity of that, but users say, but we are looking at the same data, why doesn't it reflect itself? We love it. They come to me, but Google does it all the time. You can see in the Google Docs, there's like an icon. Yeah. So users are fun, we all love our users. So let me show you what you need to do in Remalt to implement it. And here's the thing, Remalt didn't invent any wheels. We just took existing technologies and existing patterns and make them accessible or make them easy to use. We try to think, I'm lazy. How a lazy person would want to use this? I want to understand too much, I just want it to work. So I'm gonna go to my app tier 6, and in our use effect, I'm gonna do, instead of find, I'm gonna say live query. Instead of then, I'm gonna say subscribe, and it gets an info object, and I'll tell it to set the tasks with info apply changes. Okay, so every time a value will change, it will run the apply changes method on the array of tasks and apply those changes that came from the backend. And I'm gonna add a return over here, so use effect will know to unsubscribe when the component unmounts. Okay, hopefully that's enough. I click setup entities, yay. Let's do this. Yay! So, thank you. So this version with this functionality was released on Sunday. The release notes were released today. We have tutorials on our website that do that. By all means, play with it, it's fun. And what we try to do here is make the logical definition of a query, and then you just get updates to those query results. Okay, now if any of you are wondering about the underlying technology, so for the basic implementations that I use here in development and in small scale, I'm using server-side event, HTTP server-side events. Anyone know what that is? Okay, cool. The fun thing about it is that it just works and it doesn't require you to configure your firewall because it's over HTTP and it's simple and it's fun. And when you scale up to thousands of users, you can switch to industry standard tools such as PubSub or Ably or any one of those tools. We have tutorials for that and that if you want to try it out and visit our website. I was surprised. Remember the food parcel application I told you about that runs on an Heroku server, $7? That one actually uses it for everything. And it didn't crash yet. I'm still waiting, but it didn't crash yet, and it runs hundreds of users in parallel. Cool. So on our list, we've done setup, entities, paging, CRUD, live query. The next topic is validation. And validation, again, is one of those concerns that gets duplicated around the code. You have front-end validations on your form, and then you have validations on your API. And I'm sure all of us at some point bypassed the front-end validation and made something with their bank app to see if that can work, which surprisingly enough it can. But we are sharing code, so why not have the same validation on the front end and the back end? So let's go over to our task. And I'm going to say here on the title, And let's start with the problem. My user is adding empty tasks, and I keep telling him, please don't do that, and they keep adding empty tasks. So I'm going to go and say, validate, validators required. And as soon as I do that, he will not be able to add empty tasks. Okay? But note that if I open the developer tools, I don't get any network calls. So this is front-end validation running in the front end. So now let's be hackers, and let's switch over to our API and try to post an empty title. And the same validation code runs also on the backend and protects our API. Okay, so we get consistent validations between the front end and the backend. Also note that the message that you're getting back is well structured in a way that has every field and the error per that field, so you can create compelling UIs for your users. You have 100 field forms, you want to show the errors next to the field, you get a consistent behavior between the front end and back end validations. Okay, just one more second, and I promise just one more second. What I would ask at this point is, what are the built-in validators? What are my limitations, and how can I bypass that? So let me answer my questions. You can write any piece of code as validation. So I can say here, task, if task title length less than 3, so error too short. Okay, and now I'll get too short error in the front end, and the same error function will also run on my API when I do send an empty task. Cool. Now questions. That was the question.
That was but I have another one.
Okay, hit me.
What happens if you send ID and set it to an ID that already exists? Does it already have that?
You can define first of all, the ID of auto increment is not updatable from the front end, so you cannot set it.
But does that give you an error in the validation?
Probably, but you can also have a duplicate value error, which I use a lot. Like if I have phone numbers and I want to make sure the phone number is unique, so you have a built-in unique validator, but you can also write your own. Okay, cool. I answered 4 questions with my own questions. I'm happy. You have a question?
Actually, like if you already have data like stored in the database, then you will change the task class. Like how do you handle the migration?
I'll talk about it when we get to database.
Okay.
Perfect. So we've done validation. The next thing that I have, as you know, I have a love-hate relationship with my user, and the user comes to me with a dramatic use case. He says, I don't like ticking those boxes. I want to have a button to set them all at once. And I'm saying, please describe your use case. And he says, I want you to automatically iterate over the task, and for every one of them, click the checkbox for me, because I'm too lazy to do that. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go to the set tasks completed method. I'll delete the existing implementation. I'm going to do for of task of await task repo find. And then I'll say await task repo save of the task and completed. Okay? Please remind me when I'm done with these topics that I have a bug in my code that I need to fix. Just in a few minutes, just when I finish this thought. Okay, so the set all completed implementation makes sense here. It goes and gets the data from the backend because maybe I have paging, maybe I have filtering, and then runs and updates them. So I'm going to go and click it. I'm going to say set all completed, and these two will not work because they're invalid and they're too short. Set all completed, set all uncompleted. The user is happy. I'm happy. My boss not so much. And you will represent my boss saying,
what if we use promise that's all and request all of them at once?
that will work. That will work. So yes, that's completely possible. But my other boss says, okay.
Can you do a batch operation instead?
Exactly. Like, am I crazy? How many requests am I doing? I'm just setting 10 tasks, and there's like so many requests. You can see the counter at the top bottom just rises up and up and up and up and up and up, and somebody's paying for all of these requests, and we need to change it. So I said, hey, no problem. Let's move this code to the backend. Okay, so I'm going to go to our shared folder, and I'm going to add a tasks controller TS and export class tasks controller. Okay, and then I'll go back to my front end, copy the set all completed method, and paste it over there, adjust it, Just cool. And then don't need the equal sign. And then I'll decorate it with the backend method decorator. Now, as soon as I do that, when I decorate a method with the backend method decorator, Ribbon knows that if I'm about to call this piece of code in the front end, don't run it in the front end, make an API call to the backend to run it. Okay? And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define here a task repo. Remalt repo of task. So it's the same repository interface that I previously used in the front end to make API calls to the backend, but now the implementation is different. Instead of using HTTP to call the backend, it uses the underlying database to update the database. So it can be SQL, it can be MongoDB, it can be JSON files, it can be anything you want. Okay, you can implement a very simple interface and really make it anything you ever wanted. So the same coding style, the same paging, filtering, sorting, and the same everything. As a developer, I don't care what happens behind the scenes. At the front end, we'll make HTTP calls to the backend, and on the backend, it will call the database. And let's register it as a route. So I'm going to do controllers, test controller. As soon as I do that, I'll get the route over here. Okay. And on the front end, I'm going to say instead of this for loop, wait, tasks controller, set all completed with the completed parameter. And that's it. If now I do set all, it will set them all. Set all uncompleted, it will set them all as uncompleted. So the ability to use the same interfaces when I'm developing on the front end and the back end opens up a whole new window of code that can run either on the front end, on the back end, or at some scenarios like this and some scenarios like that. I don't have to have two completely different mindsets. Okay? And another side effect that you would probably like is the typing works. So if for some reason, I always did the mistake when I sent values to my backend, I've made some typing error because nobody checked me and I do mistakes when nobody checks. And this is because I'm using the same method signature. TypeScript just keeps it safe for me. Okay? And one last thing, you may have noticed that I've set it as allowed true. Okay? Later we'll restrict that because not everything is allowed for everyone.
Did you remember your bug?
Thank you, bug, exactly what I need. So remember that we've done the two users see each other, live query, whatever. It can actually add an interesting bug that when you add a new task, you may get it twice. Sometimes, not always, but you may get it twice. And the reason you get it twice is because once you get it from the stream from the backend, and once I add it myself to the array. Okay? So when you switch from a normal request to live query, just remove your front-end code that does the same thing, otherwise you might get duplicate tasks. And I'm going to go to my add task and simply not add this to the array. So here I've solved my bug, and I can do the same for delete. I no longer need to filter my array because the message streams that comes from the backend will do that for me. So if I'll add a new task, one more, it was added, and if I'll delete it, it's deleted. Okay? Thanks for reminding me for the bug. Okay, so we've done setup, entities, paging, CRUD, live query, validation, backend methods, time to grow up and use a database. Okay, so JSON is amazing for mocking and playing. I really like that. I prefer it even to SQLite because you can do cool things with it and you can see in real time what happens. But we need to graduate, so let's add a database. And the fun part here is that switching databases is quite easy. So I can simply say import, remalt, Postgres, and then I say that the comma, data provider, create Postgres data provider, and give it a connection string. Okay. And that's it. As you can see, I have no data in my database, and so now my list is empty. Okay. I've connected to the database, and I'm now using Postgres. Now, the fun part is that it's just an abstraction, so I can have multiple implementations for it. So when you go to a website, you'll see Postgres, you'll see Knex, if any of you use it. So SQL, Oracle, SQLite, MongoDB, JSON file, WebSQL, IndexDB is coming. I even once created a database, an adapter to use Google Docs as a database, okay, because I needed it for some NGO. And when it restarted, we can see over here that it created a table for me. Okay, so regarding migrations, there's a default implementation that we call ensure schemas that you can turn on and off based on whatever you like. I actually prefer this. What it does is when it loads, it checks if the table exists in the database and if all the columns exist in the database. We found that it strikes a nice balance for a lot of the migrations that I wanted to have. Okay, it's forward compatible, it's backward compatible, it's pretty robust. But in more sophisticated cases, I use migrations. I create the migration files with steps and just run the steps. But you'd be surprised at how long this can run and how far this can take you. Okay, and of course this can be disabled, and you can make migrations as much as you like them and as complex as you want them to be. So I'm going to go and post data through our API. Remember this. So I'm going to go over here and I'll undo until I get my array back and send it. Yeah, and send it. And now I have the data. Okay, so now the data is in my database, and if you want to see that it's true, let's go to Postgres. I have the tasks table. I can select 1,000 rows, and I can see the data. And if you're skeptical, I can do 4, 5, 6, and then select top right 1,000 rows, and you can see 4, 5, 4, 3 over here. Cool. Okay, so let's close some things that we don't need. And back here, we've done entities, paging, CRUD, live query, validation, backend, database. So we're getting there. And the next important topic is authentication and authorization. Users, we need to protect them from themselves. And we need to make sure that not anyone can see and update data, and not anyone can do whatever they want. Now, as far as I'm concerned, authentication is an external concern to REMA. You can authenticate using any well-known authentication method that exists. You can use Google, Facebook, GitHub, whatever, or your own user password. You just need to tell Remalt who the user is, okay? But the definition, the logical declarative definition in your code should be simple and should be in the task where I control everything that is related to the task. So what I'm going to say next, I'm going to say that I'm only allowing CRUD to users who are authenticated, okay? And as soon as I save, I will not see the data anymore because guess what? I'm not authenticated. Okay, I get a forbidden error down there. Okay, so to demonstrate authentication, unfortunately, I need to use some authentication. So I'm going to use cookie sessions with Express. I'm going to write very, very quickly some authentication logic over here, and then connect it to Remalt, and then we can continue with the demo. I'm really going to try to do that fast. So I'm going to go to our backend, and I'm going to do demo cookie session. Okay, that was fast, right? I typed really fast. What have I done here? I've added the cookie session with a secret that is important to set in your environment variable to be secure and sleep well. I've made a list of users. Of course, in a real project, you'll get it from either Google or some kind of table in your database or whatever. And then I've created an express route to do the sign-in. Now, I could have done backend methods, okay, which I would probably do in a real project, but I've used a normal express routes here to demo how Remalt can live side by side with whatever it is you're doing today. Okay, so you can add Remalt to an existing project, or if you find that Remalt limits you in a specific use case, you can always have the normal tools that you use today. So you're not limited in any way. Play nice with others. So what I'm doing over here, I'm finding the users based on a username, and if it's found, I'm setting the session and returning the user. Otherwise, I'm giving an error. And sign out sets it to null, and current user returns the current user. And on the front end, I'm going to go to our main TSX, and I'm going to add auth, which is a component that I've prepared in advance. So now I have a sign-in and some hidden messages. Let's have a look at the code. So the auth component has a sign-in user and current user state. And I have a sign-in method that, again, uses standard fetch to make a post with the username. Obviously, you don't have to work like that. Again, I just do that to demonstrate that you can use anything you want. Whenever you don't want to go through the remote path, you can use everything you want side by side with it. And you can use, of course, Axios or anything else you like. And if results okay, then we move on. Sign out is pretty clear, and use effect with the current user. Cool? And so I'll do that, and I'll say sign in as Steve, and I still won't get any data, and that's because we never told Remalt who the user is. Okay, so let's go ahead and tell Remalt. So I'm going to go to Remalt, and I'm going to say get user rec session user. Okay, so whenever results need to get the user, I'm getting it from the same session objects that I've used all across the backend code. Okay, and as soon as I do that, I'll get to see the data because now I'm authenticated. Cool. Okay, now authentication is fun, but as we all know, not all users are the same. Some users are privileged, and some users are allowed to do, and some users are not responsible enough to do some things. Let's say, for example, that we only want to allow delete for admins. All we need to say is allow API delete requires an admin role, or allow API insert also would require an admin role. And even changing the title, I can set it on a specific field level to say that it's allowed to update only by admins. Okay? And look at how clear it is, my single source of truth, my focal point for my application. All the rules are in this file, and the application just works based on them. So obviously, if I try to add something now, Steve is not allowed. Okay? And let's say that we believe in Jane. So we'll go to Jane and make Jane an admin. Okay, we've made her an admin. So we're going to sign out, sign in as Jane, and Jane can add a responsible task. And it's added. Cool. So defining role-based authorization is easy. Hit me.
Can you set the authorization on the global level instead of just on the, for instance, you set it on the task, right? If I have multiple entities, I want to set the global authorization for certain, all of the entities.
Okay, so yes, we can do it in the current version in one way, and in the next version, we're going to have defaults that you set just for all the entities. So currently, by default, we say read through, update, insert, delete, false. Okay, and in the next version, you're just going to be able to configure that in a global level, just like you said. Okay, yeah.
How do you handle if there's restrictions that go across objects? Like if you have got several, I mean, in any non-trivial application, you have lots of objects, and there might be restrictions that apply to a set of objects or dependent on properties in other objects, stuff like that.
That's a wonderful question, and that's exactly why I prefer code to metadata. Okay, because the rule over here, what you see over here, when I've set it to simple string, I can set it to an arrow function and write whatever logic I want. Okay, so when previously we said allow authenticated, I'm actually calling the authenticated function, and I can write it any piece of logic that I want, refactor it into a method, and use it on all my objects.
But how do you get, for instance, how do you get from one object to the other? How do you get a reference to another object that applies in that context?
In some cases, so there's multiple types of filtering. What you're shooting for, I think, is some kind of way to filter the data based on the user. So like this user can see these rows and other user can't. Okay, so for that, that's something that we call a pre-filter. You have an API pre-filter, which is an arrow function. There is a promise. So I can say whenever this user comes in, I'll query his role from the database, create a filter, and that filter will bind him. It won't be able to bypass it. Yeah. 5 minutes left. Does that sound good? Okay, I'll run fast. Thank you. So yes, I can do that, but I'll talk about it more later, probably in the break. Well, 5 minutes is going to be fun. So we've done authentication. You want to see deployment?
Yes.
Okay. So here's the thing. We want to deploy this to, so previously I used to deploy this to Heroku, okay? But for some reason they want to get paid now. So there are other services. In this demo, I'm going to deploy it to Railway, but obviously you can deploy it to anything. You can use a Docker and put it everywhere you want. You can deploy to AWS, to Fly.io, many providers. But before I deploy it, I need to adjust it a little bit. So first we can see that the secret can come from an environment variable of session secret, so that's good. I want to say that the database can also come from an environment variable. So I'm going to say process env database URL. Okay, and that's how Railway gives me the connection string. Let's see if my voice holds. And then I'm going to say that I want to use the same Node.js server to also serve the static files. So I'm going to do this. Just a second. So you had some time to read what I've done. Basically, when Vite builds the code, it builds it into the dist folder. So I'm going to just serve it as static files and as an index.html default route. And I also told it to use the port definition. Okay. Okay. I love that cough. Anyhow, so let's go ahead and deploy to Railway. So I'm going to go over here, open a terminal window, and say Railway init. And I'm going to name it. And it will open Railway and define a project for me. And then I'm going to say Railway add and choose a Postgres database. So it will set up a Postgres database for me on the cloud. And then I'm going to say that I'll wait for it to be done. And yeah, by the way, Railway are providing you with $5 a month that you can use their services for free. And I'm well within those boundaries for a lot of things that I do. So I can say here Railway app, which will upload my source code to Railway. Now you can configure Railway to automatically synchronize with your GitHub repo, or you can use Railway app as I do over here when you are a control freak like me. So while it's loading and building, I'm going to take this opportunity to tell you a little bit more things that I didn't have the chance to show today. So Remalt also supports GraphQL. Think about it, that once you have those definitions that we were able to use them for the database, for the API, for the front end, we can start using them for lots of other things. GraphQL immediately comes to mind. There's a lot of entity lifecycle hooks when you can intervene, inserting, updating, deleting, deleted. So you can write logic like logs or entity relations logic, etc. You can create, you can use the meta. Yeah, I wanted to do the metadata. Never mind. Remember that we said allow API delete? I want the button to be hidden if the user is not allowed to delete. And I can actually access that property and see that. So I can say my front end only show the button if for this entity the user is allowed to delete. Okay. Relationships within entities, backend only updatable fields. Of course, I can define fields that are not visible to the front end, either always like password, or sometimes like salary, that only privileged employees can see that on the API. For people who don't like decorators, we have decoratorless support. For people who like JavaScript, we have JavaScript support with JS docs, which works pretty well. And in the meantime, it has built, I hope. Oh, it's still building. It's built, great. So the next thing I'm going to say is settings, generate domain, and click on the domain. Now we have about 2 minutes until it will refresh. This is a good time to show you that you have access to pretty cool logs, and we can see the deployment logs. And you can see here that I've made an error. So this is a good place to look for an error. Process env database URL or I probably just didn't save. Railway.app. Good time for questions now. Go ahead.
Would this also work with Lambda serverless functions?
Yes. Yes. Just for the live query functionality, you need to add something that survives. I'll speak about it for a second. When you have serverless, obviously the server is less. So you can have a connection to it. Okay, you don't have an HTTP stream to it. So there's a lot of providers out there that you can use, like Ably. Okay, and then you can, as long as you use them for the push messages to the browser, you can use completely serverless for live query. We have a tutorial for that. If you run our Next.js tutorial, we actually do that because we deploy to Vercel and Vercel is serverless. Go.
What is the meaning of decoratorless?
Which means that some people are biased against decorators and feel the decorators depress them. So there are other ways of defining the entities similar to Zod. Okay, where you define the type in some kind of language. We actually plan to have Zod support, where you'll be able to define your entities as Zod objects and have the same functionality up and down the stack. Okay, let me see now that it's, see what's going on over here, because I would really hate not to succeed in the deployment. Okay, so we can see now that it did everything we've done before. It has the routes, it created the tables and everything. And here is our website running on the cloud. So the last thing I want to ask of you guys is help me to give Rimalt a star, of course. And I want you to help me test the live query functionality. So I'm going to create a QR code. And I'm going to dock it, make it insanely big, and ask you guys to take out your phones and start adding tasks and see if it works. I'm going to try and do the same. Yay, someone got to defend me. So remember to sign in as Jane because she can do things. Yay. Cool. Just 1 second. I'll have a slide and then I'll answer questions. So my last slide in my presentation is like you would expect it. Please visit our rimalt.dev. There's tutorials there in React, Angular, Vue, and Next. This is our GitHub. This is our Twitter handles. This is my email, and this is my personal phone number. So feel free if you have. Yeah, people don't use it as often as you might think. It is actually my phone number. You're welcome to come and visit it. Some kind of support, emotional support mostly. And this QR code will take you immediately to GitHub. You just need to read the QR and click star, and everything else is done for you. On our docs, we also have a demo of a full CRM application. Okay, so if you want to see something more complicated than it to do, just scroll down in our docs. You'll see a CRM application written using MUI and React and Postgres and Node.js on the server. It's running on Railway, and it's a great example of more complex things. You can also test GraphQL over there. We've set it up there as well. Yes, hit me.
So on the back end, you actually, when you were saving all of them together, you were still sending multiple requests to the database, right?
Yes.
Because you had, maybe the question is stupid because I'm a front-end developer. Does it make sense to make one request and change all of them on the back end?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a valid question, is it possible?
Yes, so you can obviously, so let's talk about it for a second. Obviously, requests between the front end and the back end are expensive because there's a latency there. Between the backend and database, they're pretty close to each other, so those are a lot cheaper, and that's how we got such sustained performance. Now, if I were updating 1,000 tasks, it would make sense. If I was updating 1,000,000 tasks, I would go down to SQL and write an update statement. Okay, so you have that level of control. So we had to do a trade-off, like we wanted to run on each and every one of them in case you have saving logic or updating logic or other logic around them. So we run them one by one, but of course you can optimize it if you need to go and do an SQL call, a direct update to database. Okay, perfect.
Maybe one last question? There's so many questions during the talk, so there is none.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Your images is amazing, these dogs and cats.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really invite you guys to come in. There's docs and you can contribute, and all the Svelte guys, write a tutorial with Svelte. I would love to try it out and see how it works and use it. Really use my number, use my email, use our Discord. We love to see people do great things with this, and we really enjoy this.
One last question.
Yes.
There's no code generators involved here.
Correct. Zero code generation. I hate code generation. Everything is interpolated in everything is code that runs. I don't need to generate it. It just runs in memory.
It's in Vite, you mean?
No, there's no transpilers. There's no code generation. There's nothing. This is pure TypeScript code that gets transpiled to JavaScript using the standard TypeScript transpilers, nothing else. Okay, I'm just using the same code in both contexts. Okay, there's no different transpilers or code generations or whatever. There's the bundler of which it just bundles it. That's it. Okay, so I've taken too much of your time. Thank you so much. I apologize for that. Thank you.
I'll do it for you. The thing in the stream. Daniel comes up and we'll tell you at least a promise so you know you can go to the toilet and grab a drink or food. We'll be back in earliest 5 minutes, but it might be 5.5 minutes from now. So
I'll post the presentation and the report. Sorry for pushing
No
my
worries.
time.
I just checked the submission and I noticed we could have talked, or now we are still live.
Okay, so I'll
So
stop
just
it.
disconnect.
Yeah, you need to tell me how to do that.
Just go to your browser.
Stop sharing.
I can also do it in a second. I just need to grab my laptop.
Leave.
Yeah. Good. You're good to go.
Hey. Well, hello, and it's nice that I could give this talk today. We will talk about querying Wikipedia for real influencers. I'll first introduce myself a little bit. I'm Daniel Beke. I'm originally from the Netherlands, and I'm a full stack software developer. And I live in Sokkerau. It's close here. I'm working on a headless RDF CMS, and some of that technology we will talk about today. I love creating things in my spare time, and the project that we'll talk about today, I also created in my spare time. So these are the chapters we'll go through. I'll first give a bit of an introduction. I'll demonstrate the app. We'll talk through what things are used in the application. I'll discuss a little bit of the architecture. It's not much. It's a very small app. And then I'll give a brief introduction to the RDF JavaScript ecosystem. So there's much more than what this simple app has. And I'll give a brief summary. So I love the world of linked data and RDF. And I don't know how many of you have heard of RDF and know what linked data is. So it's a bit of a niche maybe, and it's also in some sense a bit of old technology, and it has a bad reputation, I think. Like it can be very complex, and it's used in universities and enterprises. But the great thing with linked data and RDF is that it has a huge potential. You can join data together from sources that do not know of each other, and we'll also have a small demonstration of that today. And it's schemaless, and but we'll get into that. I love it, and I think I hope with this talk to inspire you and to convince you to take a look at how you can use it for your own projects. So we'll start with the showcase, and at some day I was just thinking about influencers, and I don't like that super much. And I thought, well, maybe I could get the big thinkers, the philosophers. Maybe I could get data of them. And I was thinking a little bit, querying a little bit on DBpedia. I will get to that, what that really is. But I saw that you have all these philosophers there, and that you could get their influences. So this little app shows the influence of philosophers, and if you like, you can follow along with the QR code. I'll get out of the display, and I'll give a short demonstration. So at first, you're greeted with a search screen, and you can search for philosophers. We'll search for Spinoza, and I'll remove this bookmark. That's for later use. So we'll start with Spinoza, and then we're greeted with 3 columns. At the left, we see all the people who influenced Spinoza. In the middle, we see Spinoza and some of his work and his interests and ideas he contributed to. And on the right, we see all the people who have been influenced by Spinoza. So, for example, we have Wittgenstein. And now we see all the stuff of Wittgenstein. And this is interesting. It seems that the internet is not fully working. So what I expected was this column to have all the influenced people. So I'll just reload the page and...
It's for sure the internet and not a bug.
No. We'll try it again, yes? So we go to Wittgenstein. Yes, super. Okay, and I'll make it big again. If that works, yes? Okay, we're back. So we have Wittgenstein, and then we can dive into other philosophers who also have been influenced. And so basically we can get the trail, how ideas travel from the left to the right. And it's not super precise. But it's maybe fun to just play around with. So
Sorry, if you went to the first column, you will lose the process, the track of the whole thing, and you just will be into the second one again. So if you in the first one select a different person, like you will.
Yes, correct. So if we, for example, shut down Wittgenstein here, it goes like this. And we can flip to Nietzsche, and it will continue. And when I just refresh the screen, it started blank, but that's because I have embedded the thing in the presentation. So normally everything is in the URL, and if you would refresh, it would hold the state. So the whole state is in the URL. And then if you found something interesting, you can say, oh, I want to save this as a bookmark. So I'll save it. And we can go back to the home page. And there we have it, Baruch till Sartre. And we are greeted again with the columns. And then we can also click on these things. And it will give us the biography that is on Wikipedia. We also have some images. And as you see, these images, most of the time, the photo of the person is centered okay. And that is some nifty thing that I'm using. I haven't written it, but it's something that we will also discuss. And you can also see the works. So here we have Sartre that wrote the book Search for a Method, or essay. And so that is basically the app. Anything I missed? Don't think so. Yeah, I think this is the app. So it's a quite small app. It's not super big. But why I want to demonstrate this today is that it gives a great insight into linked data and RDF. So first we'll talk a bit about the components that are used. So we use RDF data, linked data, DBpedia. That's the source of it. Then micro HTML, it's like a little bit like React. It's a very tiny renderer. I use Snowpack for this. I host it on GitHub Pages and Spark Wellcraze. So we'll now dive into these little chapters. So yeah, there were some people who know RDF, but I'll explain what it is. And basically, RDF boils down to a very simple idea. Everything that you can save, it boils down to three things, like a subject, a predicate, and an object. And so if you have an RDF database, it's basically a box full with things that are either a subject, a predicate, or an object. And if we would talk about today, like this ViennaJS meetup, you would have a subject that would always need to be a URL. It must be an IRI, so somewhat of a URL, but it's better if you go to that place and it gives you something. So we have the URL, and then we have a predicate. And what you see before this hash is basically the namespace. So this can be anything. Maybe some people have heard of schema.org to make good CEO snippets. Well, schema.org is an ontology, and this part before the hash, or including the hash, we call it's a predicate, and these properties, predicates, they are in a list of, like in an ontology. So an ontology is basically a list of properties you can use. And then we say that this is a schema.org event. So basically we say this meetup today is an event. And why would you save your data so verbose? Well, we'll get into that more, but one of the things is that you can join data from people you don't know. So imagine that all the meetups on different kinds of platforms, so you have Meetup and you have Eventbrite, I think, and other platforms, if they all would save their data in RDF, then it's easy to create one map with all these different events happening. There is a fourth thing, and it's a bit, well, sometimes you use it. I won't go into details, but it's basically for grouping data stores. So that's RDF data, and you can save it in very many ways. So it can be in a database. It can also be in a HTML document in the source code. It can be in a separate file. There is a serialization called JSON-LD, so you can read it as JSON. But there are also other formats, so it does not matter super much. In the end, it's just your data is saved in 3 things. So linked data is structured data, which is interlinked with other data, so it becomes more useful through semantic queries. Part of the vision of linked data is for the internet to become a global database. So the idea is not that this is one system, of course, but it's all these systems working together. And there, the next slide is a nice illustration, which tells something about how far this vision is. What we see here are lots of data sources from governments or universities, also DBpedia, which we will touch on later. But all these data sources, you can do queries that go over multiple of them. And I'll try to find DBpedia. Well, here we have one. No, that's not it. This is it. So you see that a lot of these things now have become red. So all these things are linked to DBpedia. What does that mean? So imagine maybe a university, they have a database of all their books in their library. And in the author field, next to that, they have the name of the author. They maybe link also to a URL where you can find the author on Wikipedia or on DBpedia or something like that. And so that's how all these things are linked. And it doesn't matter too much which link you grab. In RDF, there is a concept called reasoning, and that will take care of deduplication. So maybe one person links to the German article. Yes?
Is this illustration a list of data stores or a list of ontologies?
It's a good question. This is of data stores. Yes. So reasoning is a concept where it can enhance the data by distilling facts and creating that in a better way. So maybe you have a German Wikipedia link and a French one, and under the hood it knows it's the same thing, and people linking to the 2 of them are basically linking to 1 of them. So that is a bit of this big database that the people that started with linked data envisioned. So then we go to DBpedia. So DBpedia is built upon the Wikipedia info boxes. If you have a Wikipedia page, at the right side, you have this little gray box, and there are some properties. For example, if you go to a country, you would see the number of residents or the languages that are spoken there. And DBpedia has extracted all these little info boxes into semantic data. It's maintained by a group of German universities. And what I personally very much like about their system is that their ontology uses words. So I can say, for example, give me Soren Kierkegaard, and then give me all his influence, the people he influenced. And we go to Wikidata. And Wikidata is another linked data source. It has a SparkQL endpoint, which we come to later. And their ontology uses codes instead of words. So this is Pablo Picasso, this WDQ5593, and it doesn't say much, at least not to me. And probably less to you, because I know it's Pablo Picasso. But today we will query a little bit on DBpedia, and there the query looks nicer. So, but the good thing about Wikidata is it's maintained by Wikimedia. So it's more integrated with Wikipedia. And they have a very nice editor to write the queries. This editor has auto-completion. And so I'm not, today we use DBpedia, but if you look into this stuff, please try both. So another thing that I used in this app is micro-HTML. And it's a little bit like React, but if you would use it very bare bones, without use state and all these other things, just render and templates. And it does some diffing internally, so you don't have to worry about performance and things like that. It is supporting asynchronous, so some of your templates can be asynchronous. There's no virtual DOM, so it's quite fast, and it has tagged template literals. How does that look like? Well, it looks a bit like this. You import a render function and an HTML function, and you just tell the render function where it should render and what it should render. And this can be your whole app, just like React, can be inside this thing, separated over multiple files, of course, and including asynchronous parts. Then I also used Snowpack. Have people worked with Snowpack? And yeah, and I quite liked it. And then I found out that that it was not maintained anymore. But
It's in most.
Yeah,
Most code we should like.
But Vite is very similar, and so for people wanting to have a very fast development system, I would advise to look into Vite.
sorry.
Yeah. So why is Vite or Snowpack cool? Because it uses ESM modules, the new module system in the browser, and because of that, it doesn't do bundling, and it's super, super fast. Thank you. So another thing that I used is GitHub Pages. It's very easy to deploy. Maybe we can show hands for who has used it and get a bit of an idea. So the cool thing with GitHub Pages is you can just deploy your static website. And one great trick they support is that you can have a 404.html. And in my app, like I said, if you reload the app, it will show the same columns. And what happens under the hood is that GitHub serves this 404. It's not done with a hash, but with the whole URL. There's no hash in the URL. So it comes to the server, and then the app picks it up, grabs the parts, and renders the columns. It's free to use with your own domain name, super simple to configure in the DNS with a CNAME. And it means that I can run a build and then git push, and a minute later or two, it's become a bit slower over years, you have your site live. Funny fact, this presentation is also on GitHub Pages and the same thing. So now we'll dive a little bit into SparkQL. So SparkQL is the query language to query RDF stuff, and it's schemaless. So if you have an RDF database, you have one table, and there are 3 columns, like this: subject, predicate, object. And basically, everything you do is just joining and joining and joining. There's no schema, but there are ontologies, as I touched on, the predicate, and that's used for the structure. And you only can get subject, predicate, and objects. So for this demonstration, we will use the dbpedia SparkQL endpoint. And that's very similar to the GraphQL way of doing stuff. So with GraphQL, you have a server that is basically your API, and queries are fired upon that. And if you would build a JavaScript app that talks with SparkQL, you would do something similar. Or you would layer something in between, but you would do probably something similar. Then we have a nice SparkQL editor called YesUI. It's made by Triply, and I've embedded that in the presentation. So on the next slides, we'll have an editor. And what's good to know is that SparkQL can output into various formats. So it can be JSON or JSON-LD or XML triples. And in our example, we'll just use a table that's rendered. Doesn't matter too much. But if you would write your app, you can just use fetch and use a little bit of JavaScript to make nice objects and then work with it. So I unfortunately need each time to click because this thing is a bit silly. Okay, And then we scroll. So this is a first step to start doing SparkQL queries. We select basically everything of DBpedia, which is a bit silly, of course. So that's why we have the limit of 4. And we just say, well, give me a variable things of subjects and variable things of predicates and variable things of objects. So that means it just starts with the first 4 things that are in the database. So as you could see in that example, the output was a bit hard to read. Yes, we had all these URLs and it was quite verbose. So the only change now is that we added prefixes, and it will strip that of the output, but also we can use prefixed things now in the query itself. So for example, RDF :type would be the same as this whole thing with type edit. Okay, so we just had a little start with SparkQL, and now I want to show just a resource of DBpedia, because we're going to get some paintings from Pablo Picasso, and we're going to look in which museum they are and in which country that museum is. So if you look here at the left side, you see these shortened or compacted, is how they call it in the RDF world, the compacted predicates. So this is dbpedia.org, ontology, birth date. And so you have all these things that you can ask, and in which I'm interested today. It's a bit of scrolling, but that is where he is the author. And we're almost there. So by the way, this is used for that reasoning part that I explained. These are all the duplicate things where Pablo Picasso is. And some images. Yes, there we are. So it says, is the DBO author of, and then we see some links to paintings of him. And so we're going to query things like that. And so the first thing we do, so in the other examples, we had these variables. But now we say to the database, okay, first join on this thing. We want everything Pablo Picasso. And then grab this predicate. And so now it only shows us all the names of Pablo Picasso, but also in Greek and Arabic. And we say, again, limited to 5, because the presentation is not that big. So, but we're mainly interested in the English one for now. So that looks like this. So just like any other query language, you can filter stuff. And here we're filtering on the language tag of the name. So you see this @ and then the language tag. This is a BCP47 identifier. You might have seen this, for example, to note down Austrian, German-Austrian. You would say DE-AT. And that means German as spoken in Austria. And it can be much more complex. You can note the region, like I explained, but you could also note the script. For example, Serbian. Some things have been in the Cyrillic script, other things in the Latin script. So you can put a lot of information in that. And so this little thing, lang matches, just matches on English stuff, but would also match on American English, British English, or just English in general. And now we're going to grab some works. And as I explained this, so the work has a predicate, DB author. And I think I forgot to explain it, I will do now. If we have a subject, a predicate, and then an object, it's always directional. So this author property, it's not on Pablo, but it's on the work. So we have the work, and then we have the relationship, the author, and then we go to Pablo Picasso. So what I could have done is grab this thing, put it in the first place, then have author without this little triangle, and then put Pablo here. but I don't like that super much because I want to reason with Pablo Picasso as a starting point. So we start with him, and then we reverse the direction of this predicate. And it gives us 5 paintings. And if we click on such a thing, we are greeted with the painting. Sometimes it has a thumbnail, not always. I don't know if there's anyone with a... No, these thumbnails don't work. Well, anyways. So we continue. So, as I said, I wanted to have the museums, and this is basically within SparkWell, we just call this a join. So we have this this work that came out, and from that moment on, we go and we want to grab other stuff. So for each work, we say, give us the museum and save it in the variable museum. And as you see, we get again this link. Some are at the same museum. And yeah, that's how it works. If we go a bit further, we also want to have the location. So again, a join, but now on the museum. An interesting thing is that we get locations for the old guitarist in different granularities. So we get the country, the city, I don't know, maybe this might be the street. I don't know that, but so we are going to filter a little bit. And so you can just ignore this red thing. It's complaining because I wrote something a bit shortened, but the editor fixed that. So we see now the paintings here, the museum, and we have filtered. So we did another join on the type of the location. And then we said, well, we only want locations that as a type have schema country. And interesting enough, in RDF, one thing can have thousands of types. Sometimes you see hundreds, but it doesn't matter. It can have many. So that's basically how you can query. This is a bit of introduction into SparkWell. But this has all been on one database. Yeah, this is all on this one SparkWell endpoint. And we'll step first into a little bit of the architecture of the app. So I didn't use a framework. I used fetch to grab the data. I executed just a post on the endpoint with the query. This is quite simple. You have a couple of functions that generates these columns. And then the history API is used to make it possible to go back and forward between these columns. As I explained, we use this. I use this 404 thing. And then if you create a bookmark, it's saved in the device, in the local storage. It's also a PWA, so you can put it on your home screen. I wrote most of it in TypeScript. And so dbpedia does not always have a working thumbnail. But they are, in the source data, there are thumbnails mostly working. So I also do a little call to their API and cache that. And one cool thing is this WSRV.nl. This is a really great thing. It's a Docker image that will slice images for you. And you can just have a URL, like a prefix to your image URL that is a big one. And it will crop it. And it will also do selecting of the subject. So for me, I wanted to have these little circles with the face of the philosopher. And it's nice if it's centered. So this code can do that. It knows where to spot the human or the animal or the interesting part of the image. So I would highly recommend that thing if you need to slice images. And I think, I'm not super sure, but Unsplash, I don't know if many of you know that, but Unsplash uses exact same arguments in their images as them. So I would say they have the same thing. Would there be any questions about how the app is made? Or can I just continue? Yeah. then I'll just go forward. Now we go into a little bit of, so this
6 minutes.
good. So it's quite a tiny app. It's not super complicated, but I wanted to give an introduction to linked data. And now we go a little bit into the ecosystem of RDF modules that exist on the internet. The first thing that I'll show is an overview of RDF libraries. Then we briefly talk about Communica. It's a query engine, and often it's used with N3. And so if you have Postgres, and you would chop that up in pieces, you could say, well, there is a query engine, and there is a store. So you have stuff on the hard disk, and you have a query engine. With RDF, and especially these examples, you can decouple that. So you have a query engine called Communica, and it can query over any source. And you can have multiple source stores. It can be like a real database, but it can also be an in-memory store. And N3 is an in-memory store. Another thing that I wanted to point out is RDF object. It's a little bit a helper that helps you work with RDF in JavaScript. And why is that good? Well, these triples are hard to deal with. If you have a standard JSON object or a JavaScript object, it's easy. You have these properties. But with RDF, it's not super easy. It gives a lot of power, but this is where it is a little bit tricky sometimes. So this page, this is rdf.js.org, and it has all kinds of specifications, and it has all these libraries. And so if you would start to build something with RDF, there is a chance that you can find a library here that would be helpful. And then, now we go into Communica. And so Communica is something that for the work I'm doing, we're using. We're building a headless CMS where these headless CMSs can talk to each other. So imagine one organization having 30 videos, another organization having been given access to those videos, and the CMS grabs the data from that CMS when it is querying, and then shows it in the listing of the data and things like that. So Communica is an engine that can query on multiple sources at once, and it can also normalize whatever it gets and normalizes the outcome. So what does that look like? What we see here is we have selected, this is just a website where you can use it in a browser. What we see are three sources. We see DBpedia data dump. We see the Harvard library, it's a SparkQL endpoint. And we see the VIF. And this is like a little bit like a pivot table. So they know the Wikipedia author URL. And they also know, for example, the ISBN author code or all the names in English or other languages. And what we see here is a query that uses these three data sources, but it will combine the results. So we have a person. So first we start with anything in the three sources. And we only want to have stuff with a birthplace. So probably we'll have people. Then we want to filter on that it should be from Vienna. And then we say, okay, this person must be the same as we want to grab the name, and we want this identifier. Then what it will do, it will go into the books, and it will filter where the book name is the same as the person. The author name is the same as the person name, and then it will give us the title of the books. So it needs these three sources to combine this together, and what this will do is fire a lot of queries and requests, and so the result will come in a streaming manner. So here you see it's now at 20 results, and it goes on and on and on, and you don't know for sure if it's ended. You don't know that, so you need a bit of different interfaces for this. imagine Google, but with a play pause button or so. But the good thing with this is that you can create software which is not super dependent on all these big enterprises. You can make, for example, a network of small websites that are working together, but not working together in the way that they all need to adhere to the same ontology or predicates. So yeah, that's what I wanted to show about Communica. So a quick summary. We viewed and talked about this little app, influence.danielbaker.nl. We saw some philosophers and how their influence reaches. We talked a bit about linked data, micro HTML and GitHub pages. We dived into some SparkQL queries, and I showed some entry points to the JavaScript RDF ecosystem. So I hope this sparked some imagination and interest in the world of linked data. And my question to you is, what are you going to make? And do you have any questions?
I would just have a question around, because I had to Google and I thought maybe I remember something from the early days of the internet. So Tim Berners-Lee was the first one to write about linked data.
Yes.
How far is RDF, or how much is RDF adding to the original vision, or how far from it is it?
So RDF is the original vision.
Okay.
So back in the days, you had these RSS feeds, and the first version was based upon RDF. And where you can also see RDF in the wild, or how you want to call it, is you have these Mastodon applications where you have this alternative to Twitter, and they use RDF to have federation. So the data between these things is not sealed. It's like an open world specification. You can create your own properties. And it has happened with the spoiler alert. So Mastodon was made, and PixelFed is another thing, and they can communicate. And if I remember correctly, PixelFed started adding a property that they had on their own namespace, and it was something like spoiler alert. And from that moment on, they had it, and then Mastodon also thought, oh, this is a nice feature, the data already has it, so we will also add this feature. If that key is present, we will just hide the content, people have to click first. So this RDF gives, if you work together with software, it gives an open way of data. So.
How trustworthy is the data you get from these databases?
That's a very good question. So I don't know exactly what you're getting at, but I will give an answer that is about the front end. So in our front end application, we have a little bit of an abstraction that is not trusting the data very much, and it's just checking, hey, does this predicate exist with values? And then it renders a little widget. If you would have a hard-coded template, you should check for every predicate if it's existing. So there's a lot of complexity normally that would be sealed by using schemas. And that would normally happen in the backend, all these structures around it. And now some of the pain shifts to the front end. Would that answer a bit?
Yeah, I meant technically also, but also the data, the actual data. If you say, who was the influence of Sartre, could it be, I don't know, Justin Bieber or something?
Yes.
It's trusted as Wikipedia.
Well, but that's a good question. So you have another thing, which I also very much love, and it's called Shackle. And I've built a form system upon that. And so in what I'm just told, there is no schema, there are no validations at all. But you can run Shackle. It's another decoupled component. And you can say, whenever somebody inserts data, I want to validate it against this Shackle shape. And then you do have the validations that you normally would have from your schema constraints. So Shackle is a way to do that. And you can use Shackle also to create forms, because you know all the properties that are allowed and how many values are allowed and things like that, or in which language. And so Shackle is a great component that would be in that place.
Good. Any final question? Then thanks a lot. backend.